Deviltown by nevermorex. Summary. Somehow Robin managed to convince Raven into going to the annual Jump City Deviltown Carnival. That doesn't mean she's going to be a good sport about it. The Jump City Deviltown Annual Carnival was finally in full swing. The boardwalk was decked to the nines with as much family-friendly grotesque horror as the city could muster. Actors intended to scare the event-goers were wandering the pier, along with the walkway leading up to it, drawing more people into the fest of horrors. Fake blood and plastic intestines hung from lampposts, along with cardboard cutouts of bats and jack-o'-lanterns. The usual rides that remained a stagnant tourist attraction had all been rebranded for the haunted theme, attracting the locals with promises of spooks and scares, but all with the same familiarity they were used to. Wait, so Beast Boy had convinced Robin to let them all go for opening night, even if it was under the guise of protecting the city, on the most vulnerable night of the year. He really knew what the real motivation behind the changeling's excitement was. This is what you guys have been hyper-fixated on riding all week? Raven grimaces, staring up at the large, rickety wooden construction occupying part of the pier. That looks more unstable than Beast Boy's bed. You've never ridden a roller coaster? Robin looks at her. Ah, yes. All the ample opportunities I had on Azarath to ride all the Azarothian roller coasters. She responds flatly, her eyes not wavering from the structure. Robin can't help but huff an amused breath through his nose, turning to look back at the ride with her. They're actually a lot of fun. Really exhilarating. This one is pretty tame, though. You might enjoy it. I think I'll pass. Raven finally tears her gaze away, turning to scan through the crowd some more. Oh, I figured as much. Robin shrugs. Is there anything you are interested in trying? Not really, she says, folding her arms over her chest. There's a lot of people here, she mentions, eyes scanning over the mass of other carnival goers. Everyone is excited for the event. He nods, looking back at the line ahead of them. I thought you might enjoy the spooky theme. Okay, first we have to go on the reanimator before the line gets too long. Then we have to go on the Legia loop. The Reaper, Crawler, and Dungeon Downfall we can all probably hit back to back. Beast Boy rambles, pointing his way through the fold-out map he'd picked up at the main entrance. What about the Switchblade and Hellbound? Sai peers over his shoulder, pointing at the rides. They're backups and last-minute rides. Beast Boy dismisses him quickly. What about the large one with the lights? Star asks, eyes beaming the neon reflection from the Ferris wheel. Beast Boy hesitates, pursing his lips, glancing between the map and the girl. That's the ride right before we leave. It's like a wind down, Sai explains to her. Star nods, looking at it expectantly. I look forward to winding down. Me too. Raven pouts quietly, slouching her body further in on itself. Come on, Debbie Downer. Don't you worry. We'll be sure to win you something nice at one of the game booths. Sai leans back to pat her soothingly, but she cringes away from the contact. Thrilling, she deadpans, readjusting her hood over her head. You know, you didn't have to come. Beast Boy snips, keeping his eyes trained on the map. I tried to get out of it. Raven's eyes dart toward Robin, who doesn't return her gaze but grins. Someone insisted. It didn't seem that hard to convince you. Robin smirks down at Raven, who flushes at the insinuation and tugs her hood to further obscure her face. Shut up, she mutters softly, and Robin can't help but snicker in response. Anyway, we're going to do a quick lap just walking around the area to make sure we at least get a glimpse of everything, and that way we kind of know where everything is, Beast Boy explains, ignoring the birds as he holds the map up to their surroundings to get a better gauge of where they are. Then, the second trip around, we'll start on the rides. He bounces with energy. He can't make a battle plan to save his life, but as soon as carnival rides are involved, suddenly he can command the militia. Robin mutters with interest. If battles were more fun, I would be more interested. Beast Boy mumbles dismissively, tugging Star and Sai into the crowd as they begin to plan their route of the space. The birds follow after their friends, easily melding into their group as they excitedly survey the locations of each ride of interest, along with game booths with prizes that were an absolute must, along with concession stands, with greasy foods and oversized drinks. Robin lets the others take the lead, easily intoxicated by their childlike enthusiasm. A shadow catches the corner of Robin's eye, turning quickly toward the movement. He doesn't see anything that would have caused it. Holding still, his eyes scan the area in front of their group, along with the surrounding small tents and food booths that could easily shroud someone from view, especially in the dark. A large man in dark robes and a piercing white mask lunges at them from around the corner of a booth. Robin tenses. The trio ahead of him all jump and scream, flinching and cowering into defensive positions to protect themselves from a potential attack. Raven stares back unamused, as if waiting for the punchline to a joke he was expected to tell. You could at least pretend to be scared. The man exudes irritation behind the facade, a hand coming up to rest on his hip. You could at least pretend to be scary. She deadpans in response. Why even come to a Halloween festival if you're not interested in being scared, freak? The guy challenges her. Do you get paid by the hour to harass people unimpressed with you? Or am I just that special? Raven stands her ground, tilting her face up toward the masked man in defiance. All right, that's enough out of you. Robin cuts in between them, gripping Raven's arms and turning her around to head away from the costumed man and back toward the other titans. What? That's the most entertained I've been. I think he likes me, she says flatly, allowing Robin to push through the dirt and gravel easily. We haven't even been here 10 minutes. I don't think anyone would be very happy with you if you got kicked out. Robin says, Speak for yourself. She leans out of his hands, walking by herself, and almost causing him to stumble at the sudden lack of weight in his hands. Trailing behind their friends, they continue to move through the crowd, taking in all the decorations and attempts at a spooky atmosphere. The chatter of the other carnival-goers all easily blends into a sea of innocuous nonsense, almost a lull of comfortable chaos that stimulated Robin's brain just enough to keep it at ease. He remained ever on alert. Even with the passive relaxation he was able to afford in these moments, he would never let himself completely shut off his brain to the possibility of a potential threat. A sudden warmth against his side grabs his attention, cringing away from the contact slightly as he glances down at its source. Raven grimaces as multiple bustles of families push past them, with strollers and rampaging children swarming, shifting closer toward Robin to escape them. Her eyes are hard and sharp, glaring down at the parents who don't even seem to notice anyone else around them. There's tension radiating around Raven's body that he can almost physically feel from their close proximity. He reaches out to grace his hand over her arm, trying to grab her attention, and she jumps. Ripping her arm away from the contact, she turned her glare to him quickly, before it softened once she realizes it was just him. Sorry, she mumbles, turning her eyes back down toward the screaming children. It's fine, he assures her, reaching down to hook a finger in her hoodie pocket and gently tug her closer. She stumbles at the force, skittering into his side again with a grunt. Her eyes linger on him momentarily, and he can almost see the gears turning behind her eyes as she scrutinizes him, before she drops her gaze back down to the ground in front of them as they walk. Their single round walking around the event ends up being 2 rounds, as Beast Boy has to make sure that the map is accurate, and then they have to review their strategy plan. Technically, they loop around a 3rd time, as Beast Boy guides them to their starting ride, but Robin is hushed when he tries to bring it up. The changeling leads them over to the zipper ride, appropriately renamed the Reanimator specifically for the event, and eyes it with mischievous vigor. The others all stare up at the ride, watching as it goes through its current rotation of flipping and spinning the riders up and down through the air, their cheers of delight and nerves spilling from their cages as they twirl around frantically. The others don't even hesitate before hopping into the line for the ride, excitement spilling from their smiles as they chat and point up at the machine. Raven holds back, staring flatly at the ride with arms crossed, as she remains rooted in her position in the dirt, watching as the ride flips and spins the cages through the air like acrobats on a trapeze. Her eyes remain almost despondent, even as the lights dance across her face. Come on, Robin pesters her, bumping his shoulder against hers. Are you gonna let a silly little ride intimidate you? I don't understand the appeal. She responds flatly, but there's a layer of resentment to her tone that makes his stomach flip with victory. It'll be fun, I promise. Robin grins, moving them ahead in line. Fuhisi, okay, we have to wait until the ride starts moving, but then you're gonna lean forward like you're doing a flip. Beast Boy instructs Star seriously, pointing up at the spinning metal cages. Do they not flip already? Star asks, staring up at the ride. They do, but we're gonna make it flip even more. Beast Boy's eyes gleam with mirth. Oh! Starfire's eyes widen as she nods enthusiastically at the prospect. Don't go too crazy. You guys are gonna make yourselves sick. Sai chuckles at the pair. Don't worry, I only had 3 elephant ears before this. I'll be fine, Beast Boy assures him. That's what I'm worried about. Sai laughs. You sure you want to ride with him, Star? I am not afraid of a challenge. She nods confidently. I don't think it's the challenge that's the problem. Robin's brows knit together in concern. Don't listen to them, Star. Beast Boy wraps an arm around her back and guides her toward the gate. They're just trying to talk us out of having fun. Sai and Robin chuckle, following after them as they move through the guide ropes. Robin is surprised to feel a small body of warmth press in close to him as they settle in the queue. He turns back to see Raven leering close by, making sure to stay close to their group. Reaching back, he rests his hand against the small of her back, grazing his thumb back and forth casually as they slowly creep through the line. The others continue to laugh and chatter with each other, Robin occasionally jumping in with a comment when he finds a moment, but most of his attention remains centered on Raven. The ride finally draws to a close, slowing down to a shaky stop until the operator begins rotating the cages one by one to let their occupants out. Here we go! Beast Boy bounces with excitement as the operator moves over to the entrance gate to begin letting people in. It takes a moment to get the line moving, another operator coming out of the woodwork to help load people into the cages, while the first man continues to spin the machine. See, 2 doubles and a single. Cyborg points to their individual groups as they approach the gate. The man nods, pointing for each of them to split up, and then gesturing to each of their respective cages. The crew follows their direction, waiting for their turns to hop on the ride, until they're all loaded into their seats and securely locked in. The operator shouts a few unintelligible things to his coworker, whose response sounds just as jumbled. Robin can't help but jitter with the anticipation of the ride, and anticipation as they're only slightly suspended in the air, waiting for the actual ride to start. Suddenly the cage lurches forward, then back, rocking them intently as they're lifted into the air. Raven's hands fly to the safety bar across their chests, gripping the metal so tightly her knuckles turn pale. What's happening? She asks tensely, her entire body stiff as she peers through the small holes in the metal fencing toward the ground. It's gonna start spinning us. Oh my God, she groans, shutting her eyes tightly. Are you okay? Robin asks, but there's still a faint amusement in his voice. It's disorienting. I don't think you're supposed to be trying to look at the ground. Robin chuckles. That's why my eyes are closed. She snaps. The cage swings forward as they reach the peak of the lift, throwing their bodies backward against the worn plastic cushions of the seat. They make a full rotation forward, then another and another, just as they reach the bottom of the ride, sways to a halt, before reversing and sending them flipping backward as the ride begins to rise again. Robin can't help but let out a cheer as his stomach flips in succession with the ride, a smile embedded on his cheeks as they're whipped in circles through the air. Letting his body go slack, he lifts slightly as they're raised into the air. The seat scoops him up safely as gravity thrusts them back down. His stomach feels like it's floating through his body, doing flips internally up into his throat. Catching a glimpse at Raven, it seems she's enjoying the ride slightly less. Her body is entirely tense as she tries to hold herself as still as possible while the ride jerks her roughly against the restraints. Ray, he tries to call to her. Robin! She whines his name in response. You've got to relax. He laughs, dropping his hands from the safety bar to let them float through the air. I hate this. I hate this. I hate this. Raven chants on repeat, static crackling around her body as she grits her teeth. The ride slows down as they near the ground, rocking them gently to a stop, the cage swinging slightly in reverberation. Raven gasps beside him, her eyes flying open, and her body relaxing in a quick breath as they continue to sway. "What's happening?" Raven asks frantically. "Is it over?" "No, I think it's—" Robin can hardly finish his thought before the ride lurches backward, flipping them upside down as they begin to rise again. "No, no, no, no," Raven moans, eyes shutting tightly once more as her body becomes rigid. Robin takes the brief moment of lax movement to scoot closer toward her, dropping his hand to rest next to hers on the safety bar, to nudge her fingers with his. Almost immediately she takes the touch as an invitation and turns to bury her face against the back of his shoulder. Robin could feel her cringe and tremble against his back, and he lifts his hand to rest on top of hers sympathetically. A loud thud, and the sound of scattered cries of shock and surprise immediately put Robin on edge. Suddenly the ride lurches to a stop, both of them jolting forward so the safety bar jabs against their stomachs. They both grunt at the impact, hands falling forward only to land against the cage, holding them captive as they try to brace themselves. "What?" Raven opens her eyes finally to look up at Robin. He shrugs. "I don't All right, everybody off the ride." The birds stare at each other in confusion, turning to strain their eyes as they peer through the tiny cage holes toward the ground. One by one, the operator slowly lowers each cage and sets their captives free. Robin and Raven stagger out of their confinement, both unable to keep themselves from stopping and staring at an identical cage to the one they'd just been sat in, nearly embedded in the dirt not too far from the ride. They just take a little too long to stop and stare, causing the operator to come meander over to gesture for them to leave. They both head toward the exit, where they see a disgruntled Beast Boy waiting for them, along with the other two who seemed moderately less perturbed. "What happened?" Robin asks as he approaches the others. "Surprisingly, the ride isn't built to withstand all that spinning." Cyborg snickers, goading at Beast Boy. "It was so fun." At first, it took a moment to understand the momentum. Then it was simple. Starfire bounces. "We flipped so many times." "It was pretty fun until the ride fell apart." Beast Boy pouts. "I don't understand why they're mad at me. They should be mad that they have such weak equipment." "It's a pop-up carnival bee. They're built to set up and tear down like a tent," Sai says. "You're lucky they didn't kick us out," Robin says. "We'd be luckier if they did," Raven mutters. Robin elbows her subtly and then starts ushering the group away from the hazard they created. Beast Boy grumbles a little longer as they walk, pulling out his map of the rides to consult once more. "The line for Dungeon Downfall is loading right now, if we want to try and catch that one." Robin points across the pathway to the line starting to creep up the ramp. "Hurry, let's go!" Beast Boy rushes toward the line, not giving the idea a second thought. The others race after him, smiling excitedly as they join him in line. Robin moves to follow after them, but hesitates slightly, glancing back down at Raven. "Do you want to wait here?" Robin asks her, reaching out to touch her arm slightly. Her attention is locked on the tall pillar of a ride in front of them. Iris is following the structure to the top and back down in contemplation. "What does this one do?" she asks, ignoring his question. "It lifts you up really high and then drops you back down to the bottom," Robin explains. "That's it?" she asks skeptically. "It drops you fast," he stresses. "So it's over fast?" "Super fast. Literally feels like 1 second." He holds up a finger to emphasize his point. Raven looks away from him and up at the ride with a mixture of consideration and determination. "All right," she decides, folding her arms over her chest as she slowly begins to walk toward the line. "Wait, really?" Robin asks, following after her quickly. "You don't want me to?" Raven stops, turning to look at him. No, I'm surprised I didn't have to beg," Robin admits. Raven rolls her eyes, mimicking his action from earlier and hooking her fingers in his hoodie pocket and tugging him forward to follow after her so they can catch up with the others. "You convinced her to go on 2 rides?" Cyborg leans forward in disbelief as they approach. "I'm incredibly persuasive." Robin smirks, throwing his arm over Raven's shoulders only to have her immediately shrug Abby out from under the touch. "Annoying," she blushes, correcting his description. The ride fills up quickly, even as the group gets closer and closer to the entrance gate. Beast Boy's bouncing with nervous energy as he watches the seats dwindle down to only 2. "I need a double!" The operator yells down the line, blocking anyone else from entering the gate. "Is that all that's left?" Beast Boy asks dejectedly. "For now," the operator says quickly, glancing back toward the line. "What if you 2 go and then wait for our turn afterward?" Sai suggests, gesturing at Robin and Raven. "What? Really?" Robin asks incredulously. "Yeah, it'll be fine. I'm sure Sunshine wants to get this over as soon as possible anyway," Sai says, moving to nudge Raven gently. Raven shrugs. "I don't care." Robin huffs, mimicking her motion of shrugging. "If you're sure." He turns to address the operator. "We'll go." The operator helps them to their seats at the end of the last row quickly, pulling the large, thick harnesses over their heads down to cover their chests until there's a clunk of the latch as it locks into place. Once he's satisfied with providing the illusion of thorough safety to everyone, he locks the gate and moves back behind his control panel. The machine starts with a hum, the seats shaking momentarily before slowly the ride starts to rise. Raven strains her neck forward just enough to watch the ground as it moves farther away from them, her eyes scanning the distance as it grows. How high is this supposed to go?" Raven asks warily, after what feels like an eternity of silence. All the way to the top," Robin answers, pointing up to the remaining space of machinery they still had left to cover. Raven glances toward the top, her eyes darting between him, the height, and the ground. "It's going to drop us from this high?" "Yeah," Robin chuckles awkwardly. "I told you it would." "I didn't think it would go all the way to the top," she insists, her chest heaving as her breath grows rapid. "It's gonna be fine," Robin insists, arching a brow as he watches her response. "I hate this. I hate you," Raven hisses, turning her face to cower into her shoulder, eyes shutting tightly. "It's just like flying," Robin tries, staring at the specks of people moving across the ground below them. "This is nothing like flying," she shouts back. Lifting and dropping his legs as they dangle, they sit in the air just long enough for the dread of apprehension to sit in. It feels like they've been sitting here for minutes, but it couldn't have possibly been more than a few seconds. A trickle of fear that maybe the ride had broken flits through his mind, immediately followed by the thought of what might be available nearby to aid in the event of an evacuation. By the time he's mentally come up with a concrete plan to get him and Raven free, his stomach drops. It takes his brain a second longer to realize his body had already fallen, the impact of gravity sending the ride crashing down to the ground with speed he could barely perceive. His body feels utterly weightless, arms and legs flailing through the air without control but full of whim. There's a dry burn bubbling in his throat that he realizes a second later is his own voice erupting from his lips, screaming with unbridled joy at the immediate rush of adrenaline. The scream that rips through Raven is different. It sounds completely visceral, all control completely stripped, as the sound of her voice nearly masks the sound of erratic zapping as dark static swarms the ride. Their row of seats stutters sharply, the brakes screeching aggressively as the electronics and Raven's powers work against each other in a rubber band of tension. Raven screams again, trying to curl into as tight of a ball as possible around the obstruction of the harness, looping her arms around his, gripping him tightly as she cringes into the seat. Robin rests his other hand on top of her arm, trying to calm her as best as he can with the limited range of motion. "Raven!" he calls, his voice breathless as his heart still pounding heavily from the rush. She whimpers softly, the noise nearly masked by the wind and the other riders' panicked chatter. Robin strains his neck through the allotted space of the harness, trying to get her attention. Shifting as best as he can to extend his arm, He trails his hand up along her bicep, calling her name gently. Huh? Raven jumps, flinching as her eyes flash wide open, thrashing her head to look around at their surroundings. It's okay. We're not in any danger, he shouts. Get me off this thing. Raven panics regardless. Robin can't help but glance around, eyes falling toward the ground to watch the operator at the control booth frantically and angrily jabbing at buttons on the electrical panel. 2 other members had joined him, one pointing and yelling unintelligibly over his shoulder, while the others stare up at the suspended ride in disbelief. Robin's mental evacuation route had been mostly hypothetical, but if it was really necessary, he could get them down, though Raven being able to teleport them to the ground had been a pretty key factor he wasn't so sure was viable now. Ray. He tries softly. I can't believe I let you convince me to go on this stupid thing. Raven shudders. Listen. He can't help but chuckle, still moderately amused she'd managed to break the ride. I'm sorry. I admit it might have been a stupid idea. You think? A random rider yells from somewhere to their right. But I need you to breathe if we're going to get down from here. Robin coaxes her gently, resting his hand atop hers, rubbing his thumb over her knuckles, trying to ease her bone-crushing grip away from the metal. Raven's brow furrows, trying to squint intently at him, but her fear wanes the malice behind her eyes, and she sighs heavily, dropping her head to her chest. I'm sorry, she cries sheepishly. I know. It's okay. Robin nods, stroking her hand. Take a second to regain your composure a little. Raven shuts her eyes once more, inhaling deeply before he hears the faint whisper of her mantra, then her exhale of breath. Slowly he can feel her trembling hand begin to settle underneath his. Her breathing becomes steadier, until her body relaxes to what he considers a reasonable amount of tension given the situation. The ride clunks underneath them, their seat dropping fractionally, and the other riders all scream at the sudden movement. A hum sounds behind them, the familiar sound of energized electricity flowing through the track system of the ride, before the seat jolts once more, then slowly begins to descend toward the ground. The riders cheer, and Robin can't help but look over at Raven again. Her eyes are down, face flat as she scans the people below them, while the ground seems to slowly grow around them until they're safely back on Earth. Once the ride is stationary, the restraints unlock with a hiss as they pop up over everyone's heads. The riders scream and sigh with mixtures of relief as many of them trip and scramble over each other to get away from the trauma they've just endured. Robin slides out of his seat, his eyes lingering on the 3 attendants fighting over the exposed wires and buttons that seem to have appeared out of nowhere from the bottom of the control panel. They didn't seem to have any inclination to believe it had been Raven's powers at play, seemingly concerned about a wiring issue being the cause, and he decided it was best to let them think that way for now. Turning to Raven and offering her a hand to help her slide off the seat, Raven hops off the ride quickly, not taking his help as she shuffles quickly toward the exit, her face flush and her breath leaving her in an exaggerated huff. Pulling her hood over her head, she adjusts her hoodie around her body before shoving her hands in her pockets and trotting down the exit ramp. Robin follows after her quickly, not wanting to lose her in the crowd if she was in a vulnerable state. Guys, over here! The others call to them as they pass, trying to grab their attention around the mass of spectators. Raven ignores them, shrugging past Sighs and Star's smiles, and Beast Boy's amused snickers without hesitation. Hey! Sigh calls after her, face falling as she continues walking. She could have at least broken the ride after our turn, Beast Boy mutters. Raven, wait! Robin calls after her. Either she doesn't hear him or ignores him, continuing her stride, ducking through the mob of bystanders and other carnival-goers. Robin keeps up with her easily, slicing through the crowd to follow the small hooded figure as she tries to dodge him. Raven wedges through a barricade, blocking off the back of the carnival booths and the undecorated parts of the pier. She finally slows down after breaking away from the mass of people, wrapping her arms around her torso as she looks down at the ground. Raven! Robin reaches for her, grabbing the back of her sleeve to tug her to a stop. Don't. She flinches at the touch, shrugging away from him as he moves closer toward the end of the pier. "Ray, I'm sorry," Robin tries gently. "You can never just listen to me, can you?" She snaps, turning to face him heatedly. Robin falters, staggering to a stop. "I told you I didn't want to come tonight, and you made me anyway. I told you I didn't want to ride anything, and you talked me into it anyway. Just listen to me for once tonight, and give me a fucking minute, ahem." He swallows and nods, backing away slightly to give her space. Raven turns away from him again, walking over to the edge of the pier to brace her hands against the railing. Dropping her head to look down toward the water, she sighs heavily. Her nails curl into the aged wood, creating crescent indents into the grain. Robin watches her silently for a few moments as she breathes to herself. Her body so still he can barely see the rustle of her hoodie as she moves. Giving her some semblance of privacy, he glances around the area. Some metal picnic tables spaced out around the semi-empty space. A few other stragglers had made their way over to relax at the benches, snacking on their fried foods and oversized beverages. Eyeing one of the empty tables farthest away from the carnival, he creeps over to the seat and settles in, taking another glance back at Raven before turning to watch the flashing lights. People watching could bide his time plenty as he gave Raven whatever time she needed. The scenery twinges a dull sensation of nostalgia in the back of his mind. Nightfall brought an aura of familiarity along with the warm lantern lights strung across the pier. Children and their families bustling with screams of joy and excitement while they rush to pack as much fun into what only feels like an endless amount of time. Even as the sun sunk behind the water, the enthusiasm never wavered. Carnivals felt like there was no end in sight. The illusion of colorful whimsy could last forever. A gentle tap against his shoulder causes him to jump, turning to face the familiar, flat, unimpressed expression he was used to. Raven offers him a silent, half-hearted wave before lifting her legs to slide onto the bench next to him and pulling her baggy hoodie sleeves to cover her hands in her lap. Instinctively, he wants to say something, start off with another apology or even just a greeting, even though they had barely parted ways. But instead, he takes her advice from earlier and just silently waits for her to start. "Why didn't you go back to the others?" Raven asks finally, her raspy voice more neutral and back to normal. "And leave you?" he asks. She shrugs. "You could go have fun." "I wanted to have fun with you," he insists, turning to her slightly. Raven sighs heavily, closing her eyes as she seems to mentally brace herself for a minute. "I told you before we left the tower, I likely wouldn't enjoy doing this," she reminds him. "I didn't think it would be this extreme," Robin admits sheepishly. "Do you know how many people are here?" she asks, her tone teetering on impatience. "A lot." He offers an unsure response. "Exactly." She turns her attention toward the event, and Robin follows her gaze. "I acknowledge and appreciate that you thought I would like the aesthetic of the event, and for the most part I do. However, there are a lot of people here. A lot of scared people here. It's all in good fun, but fear festers. It's unpredictable." Robin leans forward and rests his arms against the metal table, listening to her explanation. "I can handle a crowd like this normally, but dealing with so many rampant emotions in the rides." Raven shudders at the mention. "It's been incredibly overwhelming." He nods in understanding, pausing a moment as he lets her words fully process. "I didn't think about all of that when I insisted that you come," he admits. Raven nods. "I know, and I should have done a better job explaining my hesitance to you while we were still home, but I didn't." She sighs, pausing for a moment. "Admittedly, your joy and excitement were so contagious, it was hard to really deny you. I wanted to revel in that feeling with you. I wanted to have fun with you too." She shrugs, blushing at her own admission. Robin feels the heat rise in his cheeks to match hers at her words, blinking in surprise as he turns to look at her quickly. She refuses to meet his gaze, fidgeting with the sleeve of her hoodie once more, as she keeps her eyes downcast on the table. Robin scratches the back of his neck, leaning forward and dipping his head down as well, to keep the attention of the color staining his cheeks. "I'm sorry I made you come." Robin swallows. "No, you shouldn't be." I know you wanted us all to have fun as a group. Group things are just rough sometimes. Raven sighs, lifting her arms to rest on the table, clasping her hands together in front of her. I know, but I should have listened to you when you tried talking to me earlier. I let my excitement get the better of me, he says. She huffs in amusement, her brow twitching at the remark. To be fair, I let your excitement get the better of me too. It's nice to see you be able to let loose a little. You don't let yourself often. He muses with a nod. I do appreciate your effort to include me. Her voice drops softly. I like the decor. Robin smiles, turning to look at her. I'm glad. I thought you would. Raven sighs and leans her side against his, turning her head to rest against her arm on the table, to return his gaze with a faint smile tugging at her lips. A warm smile lingers on his face in return, the cheers of excitement and jovial music providing just enough ambiance behind them to let their silence feel full. Eventually, Raven drops her gaze, breaking the contact to look back at the carnival, her eyes glossed with melancholy. We should probably find the others, she says, staring blankly toward the crowd. Mews, yeah, he agrees softly, following the direction of her eyes toward the fest. Inde. They both seemed to take a moment to watch the people move around the pier. Neither one was in any rush to make the first move back into the horde. Who knows how long it would take to find the others through so many people? Even if they found them within a reasonable amount of time, there was no telling how much longer everyone would want to stay out. Robin's eyes catch the spinning lights of the Ferris wheel, and despite his better judgment, his brain sparks with an idea. What if we take a little longer just by ourselves? Robin starts hesitantly, turning his attention away from the crowd and back toward Raven. What do you have in mind? Raven looks back at him, flushing, arching a brow in interest. Do you trust me? Robin bites his lip, still conflicted with the thought. Raven stares at him in silence, her eyes narrowing after a moment as she scrutinizes him. Her gaze sends a chill down his neck, but he doesn't waver from watching her. Even through the quiet air, she seemed to know where he was going with this, and was trying to gauge how serious he actually was, so Robin, she says his name warningly. Hear me out. He turns to face her more squarely. Robin, she whines, body slumping while Robin's flourishes with energy. You'll actually like this one, I promise. Robin bobs enthusiastically, extending a hand for her to take. She sighs. What did we just talk about? Please. He prods gently, offering a crooked smile. Let me make the night at least a little worth it for you. I'm not going on anything fast, Raven states, crossing her arms over her chest. Robin nods. No problem. It's the slowest ride they have. Raven stares at him, pursing her lips in consideration. Violet eyes scan his face for signs of deception or mischief as the sound of the ride crashes below them. Robin can see the faintest slip of lax in her body as her internal turmoil seems to make up its mind. And she sighs. The joy surging through him is insurmountable before she even opens her mouth. Fine. Raven rolls her eyes, dropping her hand into his outstretched one. Robin's grin grows wider as his fingers clasp around hers, gripping her tightly as he slowly begins to tug her forward and back toward the crowd. Raven makes a show of her disgruntlement, her body stiffly staggering forward easily as she relents and follows him back to the rides. The chatter and lights felt even more lively as the evening began winding down. The sunset over the bay cast colors across the water that masked into the colorful mosaic of lights. Robin couldn't remember the last time he'd ever felt so giddy, dragging Raven behind him toward the giant flashing wheel. Even if it was the last ride of their night, he intended to make it worth it for her. Sassy, sir. The line to the Ferris wheel was surprisingly shorter than he expected it to be, for as late as it was getting. There were only a handful of groups ahead of them, and luckily the ride was big enough to accommodate a lot of people. Robin catches a glimpse of Raven as they wait in line, her normally placid demeanor back in full swing, but the reflection of the lights illuminates the enamel behind her eyes as she stares up at the giant wheel. Her fingers twitch subconsciously, causing him to realize their hands are still clasped together. Sheepishly, he tries to slowly drop his grip, not wanting to overwhelm her with the contact when he was already pushing so much on her. What are you doing?" she asks quickly, frowning and following his hand with hers, stepping closer into his space. "What?" His grip slackens more in surprise at the question. Raven's grip grows tighter, twisting their palms so she can weave their fingers together more securely. "I'm keeping this." She squeezes his hand before tugging his arm so he stumbles closer to her. "That's the price you have to pay for forcing me into this." Robin flushes, staring down at her, slightly dazed at her demand. "Huh?" he stutters. "We all have to make sacrifices, Robin." She reminds him pointedly. "You're sacrificing your hand for the greater good." An amused huff of laughter falls from his lips, head nodding automatically at the request. "All right." He gives in easily, adjusting his hand against hers so they comfortably hang between them. Using their combined grip, he lifts their arms to show to operator their wristbands, and he gestures them ahead. A second operator holds the seat from moving, while the duo climbs into the seat before they're locked securely in the box. The ride sways once they're left alone, and Raven immediately tenses next to him. Robin squeezes her hand reassuringly, and she turns her gaze up to him with an apprehensive brow raised. Beyond. The ride jumps slightly, moving their seat forward just enough for the next group to file into their seat behind them. After the wheel is sufficiently full, they begin rocking again, ascending slowly into the sky. Raven's grip on his hand tightens. Her other hand raises to grasp the metal frame, boxing them into their seat for safety. Robin glances down at her, her eyes downcast, staring intently at the ground, her jaw locked tight with tension. Slowly they make a full rotation, dipping back down toward the safety of the ground. Raven relaxes slightly as they do, only to realize they're already rising once more, and her body goes rigid. Robin can't help but roll his eyes a little before scooting closer to her, so their sides are pressed compactly against each other, lifting his arm wedged between them and draping it around her shoulders to nudge her even closer. She grunts at the sudden proximity, finally tearing her gaze away from the ground to look up at him warily. "What?" "Shh." He hushes her, slouching more comfortably in the seat and leaning back to look up at the star-scattered sky. "Stop overthinking. Nothing bad is going to happen to us." "It's hard to trust the machine," she mutters, but he can feel her lean further against his side for support. "I don't like feeling like I don't have any control over my body." "Then don't trust the machine. Trust me." Robin rubs her arm. "You trust I wouldn't let anything dangerous happen to you on purpose, right?" "Yeah," she states obviously. "Do you believe we'd both be able to make it out okay if anything were to happen?" "Yeah." "Then enjoy the ride. Enjoy the view, and the ability to see everything from so high up without having to put any effort into it," Robin says. Raven chews the inside of her cheek as she mulls over his words. The heat and weight of her body seep into his, soothing him slightly against the chilly nighttime air. The tension slowly leaves her body, curling further into his side until she finally sighs out a deep breath and lets her body completely relax. The wheel continues to move them in slow, lazy circles, a casual breeze accompanying each cycle. Raven slouches a little deeper next to him, resting her head against his shoulder, as her soft eyes gloss over the festival. "So is this the closest humans get to flying?" Raven asks softly. "Kind of. Besides a plane or a jetpack maybe, or jumping off a building." Robin muses. "I don't think jumping off a building counts as flying, if all you're doing is falling," she argues. "But I land every time I do it." He grins crookedly at her. "That doesn't make it flying." She rolls her eyes, a faint smile pulling at her lips. "I think there has to be a disregard of gravity." "Oh, trust me, I disregard it all the time. It just doesn't do the same to me." Robin chuckles. The ride slows, teetering to a stop to allow them time to linger at the very top of the wheel. Raven tenses momentarily at the sudden stillness, but then takes a deep breath to steady herself, and then exhales the tension out of her body. Robin shifts his arm a little more comfortably around her shoulders and leans back to look up at the sky. Even with all the festive, flickering lights below them, offering endless stimulation, the stars that only seemed to litter the sky occasionally captivated his attention. It does look nice from up here, Raven says softly after a moment. Especially the sky. He nods. He feels her head roll back a little against his shoulder in order to look up toward the sky. And she hums in agreement. Silence comforts them once again, finding easy pleasure in each other's warmth and company. As they watch the clouds slowly overshadow the moon, it feels all too soon when the ride begins moving again, dragging them away from their serenity and back towards the ground. Is it over? Raven asks, sitting up to look over the edge. The subtle disappointment in her voice surprises him. His stomach swirls with warmth at the realization. I think so. His voice comes out breathier than he expects. Oh! She nods, sitting back against his arm, eyes falling to the operators awaiting their approach. The ride stops once they safely make it back to the platform, and the operators unlock the metal frame and gesture toward the exit to let them out. Robin hops out first, offering his hand back to Raven, who takes it easily and allows him to help her off the seat. They strut down the exit ramp quickly, immediately enveloped by the atmosphere they'd all but forgotten in their moment of seclusion. Ready to find the others? Robin asks, glancing down at her. She nods, pulling her hood back up to cover her ears and shroud her face. They keep their hands laced together. Robin doesn't bother to ask if it's still supposed to be a sacrifice on his part. He just relishes the touch. It makes it easy to stick together as they needle through the masses looking for a familiar face. Robin catches a flash of green out of the corner of his eye and instinctively turns toward the source, taking in the familiar spiky dark emerald hair. It's easy to spot the other two afterward, tugging Raven to a stop to gesture over, toward them briefly, before the duo makes their way over to their friends. Hey! Starfire greets them as they merge back into their group. We thought we lost you guys for good, Sai says. We just needed to get some air. Robin nods casually. Why are you holding Robin's hand? Beast Boy asks, his eyes locked on their intertwined fingers. I got lost, she monotones, dismissing the attention. You got lost? Cyborg asks. More like she probably tried to escape, Beast Boy mutters. Regardless, she's safe and back with us now. That's all we need to focus on. Robin cuts in quickly. Are we ready to head out? Already? Beast Boy and Cyborg whine simultaneously, their faces falling as they attempt to plead with their leader. We've been here for hours, Robin emphasizes. Wait! We still have to go on the large colorful wheel. Starfire insists quickly, grabbing the other's attention as she gestures toward the ride. You said it is the Wind Down ride. I don't know, Star. Maybe we should just call it a night for now. Sai whispers sheepishly, casting a hesitant glance toward Raven. Actually, Raven looks up at Robin and smiles, squeezing his hand as she does. If you guys are up for it, I think I could go for another ride. Really? Robin asks, surprised, squeezing her hand in return. Yeah, she insists. You were right. It wasn't so bad. No takesies backsies, Ice Queen, Beast Boy shouts excitedly, grabbing Star's hand and pulling her toward the line. Wait for me, Cyborg calls, following after them quickly. Robin can't help but smile back down at Raven, a silent exchange passing between their eyes. Come on. Raven tugs his hand. We don't want to get lost again.